Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to take place in the 4th chapter in the book of Daniel. We're going to try and make it at least up until the 18th verse. We'll probably save the remainder for a successor lesson. But before we even get on that, which we won't be covering today, we just want to briefly review what we've already covered in 4 different lessons in the 3 preceding chapters. In the first chapter, we meet the human protagonist of the book, Daniel. He is a Judean, Jerusalem of noble birth, and he's one of the captive exiles. And there was actually 3 waves of captive exiles from Judah that were transplanted in Babylon, the first of which came in the year 605. That's when Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian king and empire builder, first came in, and then there was that was the one that Daniel belonged to. Then he returned in 597 BM before Messiah, and Ezekiel was part of that wave. So there are the 2 major prophets of the exile periods. Then in 586, that marks the desolation, when both the city itself is ruined and it's a ghost town, and it's planted. The temple is completely demolished. There's just really nothing there after this point, and the Jewish nation, for all intents and purposes, is no more. There is no longer a covenant nation, but the covenant people remain. They just don't have a nation to call their own anymore. And Daniel maintains his integrity and his determination to honor his end of the covenantal with specific detail in the first chapter on the dietary restrictions of the Mosaic law. And we also meet his 3 companions who come into play in the 3rd chapter. But in the 2nd chapter, we meet Nebuchadnezzar. He was a brilliant military man, a conqueror, but he was also a builder. So the Babylonians are superior in their contribution to civilization than their Assyrian predecessors. They were actually great builders. They had one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the Hanging Gardens. First off, on the wall of Babylon itself, 4-horse chariot could pass through, so they had thick walls, and on these walls were hanging gardens. One of the wives of one of the Babylonian emperors missed her homeland, and so the emperor, to make her more at home, put hanging gardens, which were considered one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. They also had a temple tower, some 295 feet tall, and the Great Pyramid of Giza is 481, just to give it a reference. And they built canals and ducts, so they were builders. But Nebuchadnezzar was the main, the one under whom the empire witnessed its apex of influence. But he is troubled by a dream in the 2nd chapter. He can't remember what it is. All he knows is that it is terrifying him, so much so that he issues the ultimatum: if none of his wise men or astrologers can tell him what's troubling him and what it means, he's going to kill them all at once and all en masse. And while one of his lieutenants is en route, Daniel catches word, and he interprets from a blank slate what the meaning is. And there's a lot of details where you can read the chapter yourself, or type in. I divided it in 2. That the dream and then the interpretation. Then in the 3rd chapter, we witness Daniel's 3 friends, known more familiarly by their Babylonian names. They're each given Babylonian names by their captors, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who stand firm when Nebuchadnezzar builds a gold statue to himself, in which he demands that all publicly bow down before him. When everyone else bowed low, these 3 stood tall and held their ground. They refused to worship an idol, even at the threat of death. And so they are taking into a furnace so hot that the men who escort them there expire en route, yet they survive. And this gives sufficient testimony to Nebuchadnezzar that the Elohim of Daniel and the Hebrew people is real. So he's not quite converted to monotheism, but he does develop witness. I'm just going to read verses 28 and 29, which bleed into the first three verses of the chapter we'll be covering today. Nebuchadnezzar responded and said, "Blessed be the Elah of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him, and changed the king's order, and gave up their bodies that they should not serve or do obeisance to any mighty ones, except their own Elah." So he admires not only the power of the deity, but also the obedience and the exclusiveness and the love and loyalty that these three servants of him has. They will not compromise their exclusivity of worship. Even they'll be placed in fire, and because their God is so powerful and so real, he delivers them from the fire. Therefore I make a decree that whoever to any people, nation, or language who speaks any wickedness against the Elah of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, his limbs shall be taken, and his house made a dunghill, because there is no other Elah who is able to deliver like this. So Judaism becomes an officially sponsored and protected, violently so, religion in the Babylonian Empire. And it's all because of what he had just done for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's part. Now, the first three verses we read of in the fourth chapter, they're more they make more sense narratively. What we read of in verses 4 through 37 forms the basis of this conclusion. For whatever reason, Daniel, the author of this book, put it early, but Nebuchadnezzar is at the apex of his power. His kingdom is consolidated. He's secure on his throne. He has building works in motions. He's really at a moment of having succeeded, post-conqueror empire builder, and so we just want to bear that in mind. Nebuchadnezzar the king, to all peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be increased to you. So the word all appears 3 times, and so he thought himself the ruler of the known world, but no one in the ancient world really knew how big the world was. The world was as limited as their location, but Nebuchadnezzar nevertheless did command a force to be reckoned with. There was really no empire like it on the earth, or at least in surrounding territory that anyone knew about it. And he wishes them peace, and he had brought war to all these nations through the paths of conquest. Now he's wishing them peace. So the paradox of peace is that it comes through war. I thought it good to declare the signs and wonders which the Most High Elah had worked for me. So we don't even read of these wonders. We witness that he had worked a wonder on Daniel's behalf. While Daniel was working on his behalf, he gave him the dream, its details, its meanings, its contents from a blank slate in the second chapter, and obviously his 3 companions had just emerged unscathed from a fiery furnace, which we read was, the heat of which was increased 7-fold. But now he's speaking of signs and wonder, that translates as a miracle, which the Elohim of Daniel has worked for me, and we read of the miracle in the subsequent chapter. How great are his signs, and how mighty his wonders! His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his rulership is from generation to generation. So he has a sense of the eternality of this deity and the awesomeness of his power and his signs, and his kingdom is connected to is eternal because he is eternal. He might not know that, but he has a limited but sufficient and convincing testimony and understanding the Elohim of Daniel and the Jewish people who had worked wonders personally in his life. There's no evidence or inference that he became an exclusive monotheist, but he was influenced and impacted by these deities nevertheless. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at rest in my house and prospering in my palace. So in his biographical and historical context, this is when he's not at war, he's not swallowing up other lands, he's in his palace at rest, at peace, not at war, and he's prospering, he's succeeding, he's already... there's a lot more treasures and wealth in that palace and luxuries he can enjoy because of his success on the battlefield. But at this moment in time, he is at rest in my house, which for him would have been a palace, because as an emperor, anything less than a palace would have been insufficient. I saw a dream and it frightened me, and the thoughts of my bed and the visions of my head alarmed me. So this is not a new experience. This describes his reaction and reception of the dream in the second chapter. So we don't know of the contents of this one yet. He's going to reveal them in time, but he had a similarly negative experience to the disturbing elements which visited him and affected him profoundly in the form of a dream. So I issued a decree to bring in all the wise ones of Babylon before me, and to make known to me the interpretation of the dream. This is also nothing new. We witnessed this in the second chapter when he summoned all the wise men, astrologers, magicians, purveyors of esoteric knowledge to himself to make known to him not only the meaning, the contents of the dream, but also the interpretation. But in this version, we only read that he's summoning them for the interpretation, for the meaning and significance of the symbolic content of the dream. So the magicians, the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the diviners came in, and I related the dream to them, but its interpretation they did not make known to me. So whereas in the second chapter he told them nothing, no details, he demanded at sword point eventually to know what he had forgotten and what it means. But here he tells them the details and the contents and the sequence of events and stuff and what was in it. But it is perplexing, it is mystifying, it is beyond their competencies to interpret this, because all of their practices, magic, astrology, etc., are bunk, essentially. So no one apart from the spirit can interpret the things of the spirit which belong to him. And at last Daniel, whose name is Belteshazzar, according to the name of my mighty ones, came before me. In him is the Ruah of the sacred Elah. So I related the dream to him, saying... So we earlier mentioned that Daniel's three friends are more familiarly known by their Babylonian captive names, but Daniel also had a name given to him, Belteshazzar, which was... Bel translates as Marduk, who was a deity of personal preference of Nebuchadnezzar. He retained an affinity for his native deity, while Daniel had grown in his esteem and affection, so much so that he calls him by his birth name and acknowledges the fact that the spirit of Elohim dwells especially and prominently and obviously in him. He's interpreted a dream, so he's relating it once more, and he has faith and confidence that if anyone knows what it means, Daniel is that man. Belteshazzar, chief of the magicians, because I know that the spirit of the Ruah of the sacred Elah is in you, and no secret is too difficult for you. Explain to me the vision of my dream that I have seen and its interpretation. So this is an expression of confidence and authority. He designates him chief of the magicians. Now, Daniel was not no Hebrew. There was no Jewish magician. That's a contradiction in terms, because magic is a forbidden practice in Judaism and Christianity. But he's just using his terminology. He calls him Belteshazzar once more, but he does elevate him and promote him to the most prominent of these diviners, these spiritual authorities and practitioners. And the reason he did that is because he knew, he had an awareness born of experience, that the spirit of the sacred, the Ruach Hadesh, dwelled powerfully and prominently in him. And this was made plain when he interpreted his dream from a blank slate, so there was no secret that is too mystifying or difficult or incomprehensible for you and the spirit, because of the spirit which dwells into you. So he's requesting him to do something he only could, to explain to me the vision of my dream, its meaning and interpretation and significance and all the rest. Now the vision of my head on my bed were these. I looked, and I saw a tree in the midst of the earth, and its height great. The tree became great and strong, and its height reached to the heavens, and it was visible to the ends of the earth. So this reminds us of the original Babylonians, the ones we read of in Genesis 11, the ones who tried to construct a tower which reached all the way till the heavens, and that's what this tree was, which was visible to all. The thought of a tree this large is beyond imagining. To make it large and wide enough for the entire earth to behold, and its branches reaching all the way to the heavens, and its height is as impressive as its width. So this is continental spanning tree. Its leaves were lovely, and its fruits plenty, and in it was food for all. The beast of the field found shade under it, and the birds of the heavens dwelt in its branches, and all flesh was fed from it. So if the 10th and 11th verse, the one we just commented in combination on, read in combination, speak of the quantitative dimensions, how long it is, how large it is, how many people all can see it. The 12th verse gives us details and descriptions of the qualitative elements. It was beautiful and pleasing in sight, and it's abundant in fruit and more than enough to feed the entire world. And not only men, but beasts of the field could find shade under it, and the birds of the heavens were in its branches, and once more all flesh, all animals, all living things were fed from this singular food source. In the vision of my head on my bed, I looked and saw a watcher, even a saint, coming down from the heavens. So there's a person who's identified as a watcher. That means he guards things with his eyes. Every ancient city had a watchman, and he condescended from the heavens. Now, when we speak of the term humanly, we think someone who looks down their nose, but in the divine theological sense of the word, condescension is actually not arrogant or prideful. It indicates divinity coming down to man to make himself known intimately and imminently. He cried aloud and said this, "Hew down the tree and cut off its branches. Strip off its leaves and scatter its fruit. Let the beast flee from under it, and the birds from its branches." So he's not he's stopping short of a total and complete annihilation of this tree. He wants to leave its stump, but all this great thing that is so large and so abundant and sufficient to feed all living things which walk the earth is ordered by this angelic and divine force to be chopped with only a stump left, so much so that none of the animals can seek shade from it, nor birds can rest in their branches, because all it's going to be is a stump. But leave the stump of its roots in the earth, even with a band of iron and bronze, and the tender grass of the field, and let it be wet with dew of the earth of the heaven, and let his portion be the beast of the grass and the earth. So he hasn't given up totally on this tree. He still wants it to be the double side of the coin of the annihilation is the rebirth and renewal. And so that we witness that in the story of Noah, which is both a story of a global genocide, but also one of renewal. So that he has things in store for this tree, which was once so great, so prominent as to feed the entire earth. He's going to keep it alive but depleted for the present. But he has a future purpose in mind for the tree. Let his heart be changed from a man's. Let him be given the heart of a beast 7 times over him. So this is in reference, now he's not speaking about the tree, he's speaking about Nebuchadnezzar, who for a period, I've read 7 years was how long it lasted. He had this legitimate scientific medical condition. I don't even remember, let alone how to pronounce the term, but there is a legitimate condition where people can think they are animals and live like animals. It might be slightly related to transgenderism, where a human thinks that they are a gender they are not, but this goes above and beyond this, where they think they're a species they are not. But it is a rare but legitimate medical condition, and this was pronounced and issued on Nebuchadnezzar because he had become prideful in his achievements and his successes, and he needed to be reminded that none of this belonged to him. He would not last forever. It belongs to the Eternal One, the one who reigns eternally. So every king who comes and goes, every human king, owes its place and position to the Eternal King, and they're just pawns in his providential plan. This matter is by the decree of the watchers and the commands of the words of the saints, so that the living know that the Most High is ruler in the kingdom of men, and gives it to whomever he wants, and appoints over it the lowest of men. So Nebuchadnezzar owed his sovereign position to divine sovereignty. He did not do anything to earn it. He was born into the role, and he was quite good at what he did by measure of empire building. But he owed his position not to anything special he did or earned, not even to his inheritance, but every king on the earth and every dynasty appointed to rule over certain peoples owes their position to the sovereign one, the one who is completely sovereign, and he's capable of reducing the most respected and revered and worshipped of humans to the lowest. Sometimes he places unwise and unworthy and immoral and wicked rulers on the thrones for providential purposes, which might not make immediate sense, but are all part of his wise and perfect designs. This dream have I seen, and I, King Nebuchadnezzar, and you, Belteshazzar, reveal its interpretation, since all the wise ones of my kingdom are unable to make known to me the interpretation, but you are able, for the spirit of the living Elohim is in you. So once more he acknowledges Daniel's unique qualifications to accommodate his request to set at peace what perplexes him, and the answer that he gives does not set him at peace. He does become a beast and live like a beast and chomp on the grass. Away from the palace, he ceases to be a king and does live like a beast for a period of 7 years. But the meaning and the interpretation of the tree is a separate, and what it means is a separate discussion in itself. What we'll do is we'll save it for a later lesson. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. Thanks for being here. I'll see you next time. Take care until then. Bye-bye.